Hello everybody, my name is Michael Flores and I would like to thank the organisers for their kindness in inviting me to contribute to this conference. I am a retired teacher of 42 years experience, with many of them in senior leadership positions and very closely involved in staff development from initial teacher training to providing lectures on a range of issues for my fellow teachers in order to manage change effectively. After my retirement, I have worked as a consultant within the UK, and I travel regularly to India, China and Sweden, visiting schools and universities and providing lectures on a range of topics. During my career, I have worked with teachers from China, England, France, Gibraltar, India, Lithuania, Spain and Sweden. A keen interest over the years has been assessing the effectiveness of teaching and learning, and of developing pedagogies that can provide the maximum support for learning for students. It is in this spirit that I offered this short contribution, which considers in general terms some of the issues around the use of online platforms and other technologies to support learning that we can learn from the current crisis. During the coronavirus epidemic, schools across the world were closed fairly early on, and educators tried hard to put in place alternative ways of providing learning experiences for their students. This led to a boom of online education, as schools and other educational establishments sought to use existing technologies to provide a range of learning platforms that students could access. There have also been contributions from central governments and from private enterprise. The BBC in the UK, for example, has prepared a wide range of resources that schools and students can dip into. China, the first victim of coronavirus, adopted a snappy slogan that summed up this approach: "Stop classes without stopping learning." In many institutions, teachers and lecturers and educators have worked in groups to learn the best practice from each other, and consulted with technical staff to master a range of online resources, from printing up revision activities on a range of topics to mastering different kinds of online learning platforms. However, can we say that the work across the world setting up and using digital resources has been a success? It is clear that establishing these information and communication technologies has been a major priority across the world. In China, for example, technology and online learning quickly took on a new importance for student learning. A national online learning platform was launched with the goal of reaching the over 180 million primary and secondary school students suddenly unable to attend school. Additionally, more than 20 online curriculum platforms and 24,000 courses for higher education institutions became available within weeks of the initial cases. An impressive response, since mirrored in many other countries across the world. However, in reviewing these provisions, Dr. Yin Shi, Professor of Education at Beijing Normal University, sounds a cautionary note. The available open access to digital resources, he says, does not necessarily and automatically make learning happen. If we look at the situation in the UK, for example, we find that many schools have been providing online materials and remote classes for students in order to prevent them from falling behind. They inform parents in letters home and through their website. However, research by the Sutton Trust, an operation set up to support the needs of students from more socially disadvantaged backgrounds, found that only 19% of pupils from state primaries and 22% from state secondaries had taken part in accessing distance learning platforms set up by their schools or provided from other organizations. For privately educated pupils, however, they are twice as likely to access online tuition as state school peers. In private schools, 51% of primary age and 57% of secondary age pupils took daily lessons. If these figures are representative of the situation in other countries, we could find that the increased use of online resources post-coronavirus could well increase even further the social divide in education between students from different socioeconomic backgrounds. These figures could be explained largely by access to resources, with pupils from independent schools as well as state schools in more affluent areas having a clear advantage over students from less affluent backgrounds. To give an example, Mr. Wayne Norrie, CEO of the Greenwood Academies Trust of 37 schools in the UK, talks of digital poverty, with many families not having laptops or even a decent Wi-Fi connection. As he says, coronavirus has revealed the scale of the digital divide. In the UK, the situation has opened the eyes of all of us, and the government is making plans to distribute 200,000 laptops in May and June of 2020. Schools are already taking steps to support as they can to providing support for high-quality Wi-Fi access to students in remote areas. The current coronavirus epidemic has turned technology into an educational necessity rather than a luxury. The realities of digital poverty and of digital divide must be taken into account if more emphasis is to be given to online education in the future, in what will become the world of the new normal. We cannot, in all fairness, set up systems to support learning which exclude large numbers of our students. The coronavirus epidemic has made evident the stark social contrasts that exist. I would suggest that the best way forward till this inequality can be addressed or its impact minimized would be to consider online learning as a temporary solution at best, or as an enrichment to learning available in schools that can be open to all. If a school sets up a virtual or managed learning environment, as many do, it needs to prioritize enabling teachers to get resources online and accessible to pupils. In many instances, this means distributing a range of structured lessons to the learners, lessons that they can access at any time. This is a well-established practice in many schools and in further education. It works well with learning activities that focus on the transmission of knowledge and where teachers adopt a highly didactic style of teaching and learning, since no classroom interaction is possible. While this may work well with older and more highly motivated learners, careful thought has to be given to lessons of this sort for younger and mixed ability learners. The nature of the medium through which the lesson is delivered, the online platform, and the context in which the lesson is accessed, long distance, together mean that teachers will need to consider carefully the nature of the learning materials that are used and the pedagogy that will best support learning. An interesting example of this has been the experience of St. Louis International School in Milan, Italy, a nation particularly hard hit by the corona crisis. In a very interesting article, their principal comments on their experience of online teaching during the epidemic. She states that one of the first things they realized was that slightly adapting existing learning plans was not enough, and that in some standards, especially early years, they had to overhaul planning to ensure lessons could be accessed more successfully. I have been fortunate in the last few weeks to work with a school in China that allows me to monitor the online lessons that it is providing. I have initially worked with a young teacher in her third year of teaching. This support is provided at her request, as she wanted to receive advice and support about how she was managing this new way of working, since the school is in lockdown and all lessons take place using ClassIn software. Since I am provided with management access, I am able to view the lessons, see the materials that she is using, even see the student boards on which they write their responses. In video call conversations, we have been able to discuss the issues that arise. It is interesting to note that in her own self-review, she identifies how difficult and frustrating it was at the start when she was delivering standard lessons. There were issues of student engagement, of poor impact on learning, of very limited learning gains. She highlighted how this feeling was shared by her colleagues, and that they had a series of meetings to discuss strategies to find solutions to this problem. She began to adapt materials and constantly think about the impact this way of working was having. Such reflection and reaction, both by her and her colleagues, are to be commended and needs to be part of every teacher's professional behavior. There is a well-known truism that we all use: we learn from experience. But that is not necessarily so. We learn from reflecting on our experience. This reflection is something we all have to take part in if we are to learn the right lessons from the experience of extended use of online technologies to support teaching and learning during the coronavirus epidemic. It is, I feel, important for the future development of online teaching and learning to acknowledge that it is not always enough to simply deliver the standard classroom lessons through a distance learning package. Instead, we need to consider how to make best use of the technology and the context in a way that offers maximum support for learning. We must not forget that learning how to install and make use of the technology itself is not the key issue here. It is a very necessary first step which all potential users need to go through, since without it, nothing would happen. However, it is not in itself enough without taking a second step, that of carefully considering how these technologies can be put to best use as part of the range of mechanisms that the school puts in place to support teaching and learning. Once you have a situation where students are able to engage with the online activities, which, as we have seen, can be challenged enough, there still remain a number of key questions that one needs to consider, questions which form part of day-to-day classroom practice in a normal school setting. A number of the key questions that suggest themselves are, for example, how will students and indeed teacher engagement be monitored during and after a closed-down period? After all, what is the point of setting up system structures and procedures for online working if you then do nothing to monitor the impact of their use on learning? The use of time-consuming and costly resources using new technologies must never become a time filler activity that serves to allow schools to say that learning is continuing, but which, in reality, serves to keep a proportion of the students occupied. Teachers are very careful to ensure that students are focused and on task during normal lessons. This raises a second question regarding online lessons. How will the school moderate behavior of students online? I have observed in the last few weeks a number of online lessons from China, referred to above, that allowed me to monitor student behavior by checking how and to what degree they engage with the lessons. It was interesting to see how students drifted in and out of the virtual classroom, with some even abandoning the classroom after a short period of time. They would never consider this type of behavior in a class, and indeed, it would never be tolerated in a school setting. Finally, in this section, a key question to consider would be how teachers will engage with learners who are struggling with accessing online learning. This is very important when the use of online technology becomes the main mechanism the school has for ensuring that learning is taking place. Arrangements need to be made to find out who needs support and then to provide it. In the case of online lessons, if a student makes the effort to engage with the lesson and finds that he or she has problems accessing the learning, it is very easy for the student to lose heart, to feel demotivated, and to cease to take part. I was sent a recording of a fee-paying school in Spain where the teachers monitor lessons carefully and identify the need to provide additional support for specific students. They then have time available, crucially, to work with the students on any learning issues that have emerged. In the specific example I was sent, the teacher contacted a student and provided a short tutorial involving pronouncing keywords and using them in structured sentences. Following this intensive practice, she then referred the student to specific online materials to follow up this tuition. This, to me, represents very effective use of online technology. We have alluded above to the importance of being able to make best use of the technology to support online learning and indeed the teacher's work in the classroom. This implies, if it is to have an impact, a careful program of teacher education that will enable colleagues to make the most effective use of these new technologies. In the countries I have visited and worked in, including the UK, I have seen numerous examples of senior leaders making important investments to set up classrooms with interactive whiteboards, LCD projectors, laptops, all the necessary connections, which have then stood there and gathered dust. I have seen a lot of work being put up to establish learning platforms and support classroom learning in that way. However, this sometimes leads to nothing. Minimal use is made of them. This, I feel, is because the necessary second step is not always taken, the provision of a training package for staff. Without this investment in the teachers, the investment in the technology can never yield a proper return. If, post-coronavirus, we are to make greater use of these new technologies to support teaching and learning, there has to be an extensive program of teacher education to provide staff with the skills and the confidence that they need to make it work. Furthermore, if we are to make better and more effective use of ICT in the schools of the post-coronavirus new normal, it has to become a key part of the school's strategy to develop new and more effective ways of raising standards. There are certain key conditions for any initiative to work in a school, and it is vital to follow these if schools are to make sustained use of new technologies in the future. The following are vital steps. Senior leaders need to set up the use of new technologies, including online resources, as a key priority for school development. They have to explain clearly why they are doing this and what their expectations are of the staff in making the initiative work. It will take time to achieve, so they must keep reminding staff of these expectations. There must be a commitment to provide the right tools for the staff, the hardware, the software, the training. And schools, as I say, must provide the appropriate training to ensure that all can confidently play their part in meeting these expectations. With any initiative involving use of ICT, it is important to appoint teachers with the key responsibility of assuring that this is done in different standards or subjects. Then comes the most challenging part of the process. Senior and middle leaders must monitor carefully that these expectations are being met in the classroom and develop strategies to review progress and, where necessary, make changes. Crucially, they must deal with the reluctance schools always face when they propose new ways of working in the classroom. Staff at all levels need to embrace these new ways of working and know that they will be supported, but also that they will be held to account. Without this accountability at all levels, very few initiatives can have an impact. In conclusion, I have seen examples over the years where enthusiasm for the use of new technologies leads to initiatives and make use of them without proper reflection, and above all without considering why they are being used. It is almost as if, because it is there, I will use it. I believe that in applying any form of teaching and learning initiative, we must ask ourselves a key question. Is this the best way of doing it? I refer you to one last example. I have seen in 5 schools in 3 different areas of China the use of a software package that allows foreign speakers of English to drop in on the lessons by prior arrangement and do a range of activities with the students. Schools enter into a contract for a specific period with the provider. The idea is impeccable. Provide the students with access to foreign speakers who are usually young and glamorous, to quote some of the students I spoke to. The reality for me was a disappointment. The first 20 minutes of the lesson, the Chinese teacher practiced vocabulary and structures, usually at pace, very effectively. In the second 20 minutes, the foreign tutor came on and did exactly the same thing. What new learning was taking place? In their enthusiasm to be forward-looking and to include innovative ways of working, the school had used an expensive package in a way that had very limited impact on learning gains. I strongly believe that information technology in the classroom, supported by access to quality online resources, can make a real difference to students' learning and to raising standards. The use of new technologies requires a confident and reflective staff who will constantly try to make better use of the technology available. If this is to become a reality, it is best achieved as a whole school approach. The key is to be sure of what you are gaining through the use of new technologies by carefully analyzing the impact and this use will have. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.